I didn't think I'd ever be in a place like this, telling a story like this. But here I am, sitting in front of you all, trying to make sense of what happened that night. It was just supposed to be a fun costume party, an annual tradition. Every year my friends and I, along with dozens of others from nearby towns, would head up to this old lodge in the mountains. It's an isolated place, buried deep in snow and surrounded by thick forests, perfect for a winter getaway. The kind of place that feels like it's cut off from the rest of the world. And every year for one night, we'd all dress up as animals. Some silly tradition they'd started long before I began attending. Animal-themed costumes, a roaring fire, drinks, and music. It was supposed to be a carefree escape from our everyday lives. This year, though, something was different. We arrived in the late afternoon, just as the sun was setting behind the mountains. The snow had already piled up several feet high, and the air was crisp with that biting chill that makes your breath fog. I remember feeling a little uneasy, even then, but I shrugged it off. I was probably just tired from the long drive. My friends, as usual, were pumped. They always got way too excited for this kind of stuff, but I wasn't about to spoil the fun. The party had started by the time we got there. The lodge was packed, and everyone had already donned their costumes. Bears, foxes, wolves, owls, whatever animal you could think of. Someone was probably wearing it. Some of the costumes were simple, just masks or furry hats, but others were elaborate, like full-body suits with moving parts. I wasn't that creative, so I ended up as a wolf, my outfit pretty basic. Black fur, gray accents, a mask that covered most of my face except for my eyes. Nothing special, but it did the job. The lodge itself was huge, with towering wooden beams and walls covered in old photographs and hunting trophies. A massive stone fireplace dominated the main room, flames crackling and throwing warm light across the floor. Tables were scattered everywhere with bowls of snacks and bottles of spiked cider. People were laughing, dancing, just enjoying themselves. It was exactly the kind of laid-back, cozy vibe we needed after weeks of routine. It wasn't long before I grabbed a drink and wandered off on my own, looking for a quiet corner. The party was fun and all, but I needed a moment to take everything in. The scene outside was just as beautiful. Snow was falling gently, blanketing everything in white. Through the large windows you could see the trees bending slightly under the weight of the snow, and the faint outline of distant mountains fading into the evening gloom. It all felt surreal, almost too perfect. That's when I saw it. At first I thought it was just another guest in an oversized costume. I mean, everyone was dressed as animals, and some of the costumes were pretty impressive. But this one was different. It stood near the far side of the room, close to the patio doors, almost blending into the background. Tall, easily taller than anyone else at the party, and covered in thick white fur. Its back was turned to me so I couldn't see its face, but its sheer size was enough to catch my attention. I remember thinking someone had really gone all out. The costume was too good, too detailed. The fur rippled as it moved, like it wasn't just fabric but something real. I edged closer, partly out of curiosity and partly because something about it made me uneasy. There was a tension in the air around it, like the atmosphere shifted the closer I got. As I moved through the crowd, I started to notice more details. The creature's fur wasn't just white. It was matted, dirty, with clumps of ice sticking to it as though it had come from outside. Its body was massive, broad-shouldered, with arms that seemed too long for a person inside a costume. I stopped a few feet away, my heart beating a little faster. I wasn't sure why, but something about this thing didn't feel right. I took a deep breath and forced a casual tone. "Hey man, awesome costume," I said, hoping whoever was inside would turn around and laugh, maybe say something to break the weird tension that had settled over me. But it didn't. The creature didn't move. It just stood there, its back still turned to me, like it was ignoring me completely. I could hear the muffled sounds of the party, music, laughter, people clinking their glasses, but it all seemed distant, far away. My skin prickled with the sense that something was terribly wrong. Then, slowly, it turned its head toward me. The face, if you could call it that, wasn't what I expected. It wasn't a mask. It was real. Its eyes were small, beady, and set deep in its skull, glowing a faint, unnatural yellow in the dim light. The skin around them was gray and leathery, stretched tight over sharp, angular bones. I could see its breath, visible in the cold air, each exhale slow and deliberate, like it was watching me, studying me. In that moment, every instinct in my body screamed that this wasn't someone in a costume. This wasn't part of the party. This was a real Yeti. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. My throat tightened, and I felt my heart start to pound in my chest, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of my neck. For a second, I thought maybe I was losing it. Maybe it was a prank. But those eyes, they weren't human. The way it looked at me, I could feel its hunger. It wasn't just staring at me. It was sizing me up, the way a predator does before it strikes. And then it did something that confirmed my worst fear. It smiled. Its lips pulled back, revealing jagged, yellowed teeth. The kind of teeth that could tear flesh from bone. And in that moment I knew. It knows I've figured it out. I know what it is, and now it knows I know. Without thinking, I backed away, my legs shaking. My first thought was to run, but the thing took a step forward, blocking my path. It didn't make any sound, but I could feel the weight of its presence, the slow, deliberate movements of a hunter playing with its prey. The room felt smaller, colder. I had to get out, fast. How I came out of that room I can barely recall. My legs moved themselves while my brain was too fuzzy with fear to understand what was going on. Stumbling through the crowd, tachycardia beating in my chest and ears ringing with blood, I could hardly think. The party was still in full swing around me, people laughing and talking, oblivious to a real live monster among them. I pushed through, desperate to put as much distance between myself and that thing as possible. I glanced over my shoulder and there it was, moving slowly at first, but with a deliberation of pace, its hulking form making its way through the mass of people. No one seemed to notice the way it slipped between them, like some spectral shadow. It wasn't chasing me yet, not outright, but it didn't have to. It knew where I was going. The lodge was large, but not that large. There weren't many places to hide, and the further I moved, the more trapped I felt. I shoved open a side door that let me into a narrow hallway, away from the party, and hoped that time would give me a chance to get my head together. The corridor was dimly lit. The air was suddenly cooler, quieter, the sounds of celebration falling behind me. In that one skittering second, I really did think I might have lost it. With my back against the wall, I worked to catch my breath to clear my head so I could think. But it was no use because all I could see was that thing's face, yellow eyes, teeth, that horrible knowing smile. This wasn't some kind of misunderstanding or a prank gone awry. This creature was something old, something dangerous, and it was hunting me. I needed to get away. I needed to leave the lodge, get into the snow away from them. How was I to do that? The front door was too obvious. It would expect that. Maybe the back? I went rummaging through my brain to remember the layout of the place. There had to be another exit, something less obvious. Footfalls. Heavy, plodding footsteps reverberated down the hall. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I knew what it was before I even looked. It was coming for me. Slowly, steadily, like it had all the time in the world. I peeked around the corner, just for a second, and there it was, its massive form lumbering down the hall, its head slightly bent so it could fit into the narrow space. My stomach twisted. It was getting closer, and I didn't have much time. I bolted. I sprinted down the hall, not caring about the noise I was making. I just needed to move. Needed space between me and that thing. My boots skidded on the wood floor as I reached the end of the corridor, turning sharply and almost crashing into a door. A storage room. No, that wouldn't help. I needed an exit. I kept running, bursting into a larger room. A dining hall, maybe. Long wooden tables stretched across the room, but it was empty now, the lights dim. The windows on the far side were large, overlooking the snowy landscape outside. The windows. I ran toward them, grasping one of the handles and tugging. Locked. Of course. My hands scrambled, feeling for the latch. The footsteps behind me got louder, closer. I could hear it breathing now. Low, deep breaths, like it was enjoying the chase. Finally, the window gave way, and cold air rushed in to bite at my skin. I threw myself out into the snow, the sharp chill a shock after the warmth of the lodge. I tumbled down, landing awkwardly in a snowdrift, the powder soft but freezing. My breath came in ragged gasps, the cold air burning my lungs. For a moment I just lay there, staring up at the night sky, the stars twinkling innocently above me. Then I heard it. A low growl. Deep, almost like a rumble in the earth itself. I scrambled to my feet, legs weak beneath me, and turned toward the lodge. It stood at the window, its massive frame silhouetted against the dim light inside. In the way it moved, the way it hunched, it didn't seem like anything that should exist in this world. It was ancient, primal. Yet it was still grinning. I took off. The snow was knee-deep, but it didn't matter. It slowed me down, though. I needed to be away, needed to put as much distance between me and that thing as possible. The trees loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, yet they were my only hope. If I could just make it into the forest, maybe I could lose it in the thick underbrush or at least hide long enough to figure out what to do. I hurtled into the forest, the snow sticking to my legs as it howled around me, my breath shallow, painful. The branches scratched at my arms, my face, and I hunched over them, ignoring them as I pressed on. Behind me, the Yeti, its footsteps in the snow growling softer now, but still closer, so close in fact, each sound threatened to stop my heart from beating and to rocket it through my ribcage in a frantic bid for freedom. I pressed further into the woods, deeper into the darkness. The trees closed in around me, their skeletal branches twisting above, reaching for the sky like sharp claws. The light from the lodge was a long, long time gone, eaten by the night, and I could barely see anything in front of me, only the faint outline of snow-covered trees in the dark. Then I tripped, my foot catching on something buried beneath the snow. I went down hard, hitting the ground with a muffled thud, the cold seeping into my bones. My hands scraped against ice as I tried to push myself up, my mind racing, every muscle in my body screaming to move. But before I could, I felt it. The ground trembled beneath me. The low, guttural growl was right upon me now. I could feel it in my chest, purring through the earth. I dared not lift my head, did not dare face this thing towering over me now. I heard the sound of its breathing, saw its shadow stretching over me, long and distorted in the moonlight. I was trapped. There was nowhere left to run. "What do you want from me?" I gasped, my voice little more than a whisper. My hands clenched into fists in the snow and my whole body was shaking. Then, in a not quite human voice, it spoke. You know, I froze. The words were incoherent, deep, like the growl of some ancient creature. But I understood them. It wasn't just after me for sport. It wasn't just some mindless beast. It knew that I had seen it for what it really was. "You know," it repeated, closer this time, its hot breath against the back of my neck. "And now, you die." Terror seized me. In a last desperate move, I pushed off the ground, stumbling forward, snow flying around me as I lunged into the trees. I could feel the Yeti's massive hand swiping at me, barely missing, the force of it sending a blast of cold air against my back. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I ran without looking back, not stopping even when trees crowded in, their gray trunks like jagged ice walls. My body screamed in protest as my legs felt heavy and numb from cold. Stronger than the pain was the terror pushing me onward. I could still hear the Yeti's low growls, echoing through the forest behind me. A constant reminder that no matter how fast I ran, it wasn't far behind. Branches tore at my arms and legs. The snow was like shards of glass stinging my face, and the cold bit into any patch of skin left exposed. The darker it got, the deeper I plunged into the woods, the trees thickening into a tangled maze of shadow and ice. Every step felt treacherous now, the knee-deep snow sucking my boots in with every frantic lunge forward. I'd lost all sense of direction, just no idea at all where I was going. I knew only one thing. Once I stop, it's over. The growls grew loud, louder, closer, and with them, the sound of heavy footsteps crushing the snow beneath. It was moving faster now. It wasn't toying with me anymore. This was the end game. I wasn't prey anymore. I was a target, a loose end it needed to eliminate. My mind spun in panicked circles. I couldn't outrun it forever. I had to find shelter, some kind of hiding place, or... I saw something ahead of me, a break in the trees, a slope that was steep and jagged, down into what seemed to be a small ravine. I hesitated for just a moment, long enough for another growl to slice through the air, closer than ever. I didn't have time to think. Without any more thought, I plunged down the slope, feet slipping and sliding on the ice surface as I went down into the darkness below. The canyon was narrow and tortuous, the walls of snow and rock closing in on either side of me. It was precarious, but I knew it was my only hope. If I could get deep enough, maybe I could hide. Maybe I could... A sharp crack rang out, the unmistakable sound of something enormous stirring overhead. I turned to face upward just in time to see the Yeti come fully into view, its colossal frame filling the top of the slope, outlined against the pale moonlight. Its eyes, those awful yellow eyes, shone in the dark, fastening on me with a predatory intensity, making my blood go cold. "You can't escape," its voice growled, more guttural than human, the words rasping from somewhere deep in its throat. "I will find you." My heart was racing in my chest, my mind a blur of fear and desperation. I scrunched as fast as I could down the ravine, the snow giving way beneath me, hands clawing at the frozen ground for balance. I'd heard it start down behind me, its huge hands clamping to the rocks, claws screeching against the ice as it moved with terrifying ease. It was faster than me, it was stronger, and it wasn't going to stop. The ground stopped falling away beneath my feet, and instinctively I dove between the tiniest gap between rocks. It wasn't much, just barely big enough for my body, but it was something. I jammed myself into the crevice, cold rock against my back, my breathing shallow and ragged. The moment held its breath. The only sound in the air was of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, my breath coming in desperate gasps. Had I lost it? Was it? A huge hand slammed into the rock just above my head. I suppressed a scream, pressing myself further into the crevice, hoping against hope that it wouldn't see me, that maybe, just maybe, the darkness would hide me. But the Yeti was relentless. Its claws scraped against the stone, sending a shower of snow and ice raining down on me. I could hear its low rumbling growl, feel the heat of its breath as it searched for me, its claws reaching into the crevice, inches from my face. I held my breath, my body shaking with fear. This was it. This was how it was going to end. I could feel its fingers brushing against the edge of my boot, the raw power in every movement it made. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst from my chest, every muscle in my body tensed, waiting for the inevitable. But then, just as it seemed its hand would close around me, there came a noise, a far-off muffled cry. For a moment I thought it was just my imagination, a trick of my panicked brain. But no, it was real. Voices, human voices. They were coming from somewhere up the slope, faint but unmistakable. The Yeti stopped, its head jerking upward when the sound caught his attention. The growling grew louder, more agitated. It wasn't just me anymore. Someone else was close by, and that was enough to send it off target, if only for an instant. "Help!" I gasped, the word escaping before I could stop it. "Help me!" The Yeti snarled. Its attention snapped back to me. But it was too late now, as the voices were getting closer and louder. I could see movement up at the top of the ravine. Figures with flashlights, beams cutting through the darkness. The Yeti let out a frustrated roar, the most dense and angry sound that sent tingles down my spine. It took one last swipe at the crevice, its claws barely missing me before it turned and then bounded up the slope and disappeared in the shadows. I didn't stir a move. I couldn't. I had frozen, paralyzed by fear regarding what had just occurred. It would take me a long moment to realize I was alive, that I was still breathing. I could distinctly hear voices calling, getting closer. The light from flashlights flickered through the clumps of snow on top of the rocks. Then at last, my body gave out, and I collapsed, the weight of all this landing squarely upon me. Coming to, I wasn't in the ravine anymore. I was wrapped in warmth, and there was a vague tinge of wood smoke in the air. For a few instants, I couldn't piece together where I was, in the lodge again. The wooden beams on the ceiling greeted me as my eyes flickered open in disorientation. I ached all over, but the worst of the cold had left my bones in peace and was replaced by a thick, warm blanket wrapped around me. I sat up slowly, wincing at sore limbs. Gone was the wolf costume, replaced by a thick woolen sweater and some pants that belonged to nobody I knew. The room I was in was small. It had a fire crackling in the corner and a single window which looked out into the snowy landscape outside. The Yeti, the chase. It came back in just 1 second, and my heart skipped a beat. "You're awake." The voice was sudden and startled me. I turned rapidly to see a man standing in the doorway, his face etched with concern. He was one of the guests from the party. I recognized his face, though I hadn't spoken to him that night. "What happened?" I croaked, my throat dry and scratchy. "The Yeti." "We know," the man interjected, his tone moving a step ahead. "We found you just in time. You were lucky, you know. Most of those who come face to face with that thing don't make it out." I stared, my mind at a screaming halt. You know about it? The Yeti? It's real?" He nodded grimly. "More real than any of us would like to admit. This place, it's been going on for years. The party, the costumes. It's all a way to appease it, to give it what it wants without letting it hunt the rest of us." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, what it wants?" He let out a deep breath as he rubbed a hand over his face. "The Yeti has lived in these mountains for centuries. It's an ancient creature, smart, ruthless. It usually keeps to itself, but every winter during the darkest nights, it hunts. It's drawn to crowds, to gatherings, and once it finds its prey, it doesn't stop until—" His voice fell away, but I knew exactly what he meant. "And the party?" I asked, no more than a whisper. "Why do you keep having it? Why invite people here if you know the Yeti is hunting?" He caught my gaze, his face etched in a guilt I somehow couldn't understand. "We don't have a choice. If we don't keep the tradition going, if we don't give it something to chase, it will come for all of us. The party, the costumes, it's all part of the deal. As long as it thinks it's hunting, it stays away from the rest of the town, from our families." My stomach twisted in horror. "So you're saying I was bait?" "We didn't mean for it to be you," he said quickly, his face pale. "We try to control it, to manage who the Yeti goes after. But sometimes things go wrong." I stared at him, the realization crawling over me like something from a bad dream. It wasn't just about survival. It was a game, a ritual, a twisted, horrible tradition that they'd all been part of for years. And I was right in the middle of it. He took a step backward, almost as if to give me space to process this information. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice sounding hollow. "We never wanted anyone to get hurt, but the Yeti, it's smarter than we think. It knows. And once it has you in its sights, There's no escape. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Everything that had happened to me, the terror, the betrayal, all weighed upon me like a smothering blanket. But one thing I knew for sure. It wasn't over. The Yeti was still loose, and it was still hunting. Thank you all for listening to my stories. If you enjoyed them, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future videos.